Heath Ledger died after playing the Joker. Jake Lloyd developed schizophrenia after becoming Anakin Skywalker, and Jim Carrey forgot his entire identity. Evan Peters always played dark characters, but in 2022 he crossed a line he'd never crossed before. His role as Jeffrey Dahmer in Netflix's Dahmer Monster wasn't just a career high, it was a descent into darkness that he almost didn't return from. Peters threw himself into character. He studied hours of police interviews, crime scene footage, and victim testimonies. He isolated himself for months, lost weight, changed his voice, posture, and speech pattern, and by the end of filming, he said he was so mentally and emotionally exhausted that he was having nightmares. His body hurt, his soul felt numb. Even the show's creator Ryan Murphy said that they brought on a trauma therapist because things got so bad. But it wasn't enough. After the series aired, Peters vanished. No press tour, no interviews, just silence. Fans called it media burnout, but the reality, Peters wasn't taking a break. He was trying to recover from becoming a monster. Heath Ledger's Joker was electrifying, it was unforgettable, it was unmatched, and still sets the bar to this day. But it also killed him. To prepare, Ledger locked himself in a hotel room for 43 days. He wrote in a journal as the Joker, scribbled madness, practiced the laugh, and spoke in voices that weren't his. He lost sleep, lost weight, and eventually lost touch with reality. His family described him as spiraling. His father later revealed entries from his journal filled with disturbing quotes and cryptic ramblings. Ledger would go on to tell reporters that the role pushed him to the brink. He was quoted as saying, "Last week I probably slept an average of 2 hours a night. It was a physically and emotionally draining experience." And then, 6 months before The Dark Knight premiered, he was dead. A toxic combination of sleeping pills, painkillers, and anxiety meds. Was it an accident? Maybe. But the Joker stayed with him until the very end, and Ledger never walked away from the role that would go on to make him iconic. In 1999, Jim Carrey would go on to play Andy Kaufman in the film Man on the Moon. But he didn't just play Kaufman, he became him. Carrey would use method acting to the extreme. For months, he refused to break character. He wouldn't respond to his real name. He made demands as Andy. He mocked people as Andy. Behind the scenes, the cast and crew were disturbed, some even afraid. Footage from the documentary Jim and Andy shows Carrey lashing out at people, creating tension, behaving like someone in the middle of a psychological breakdown, and that's exactly what it was. Years later, Carrey would go on to admit, "I didn't exist anymore. I became something else, and I didn't know how to undo it." After Man on the Moon, he stopped chasing stardom. He withdrew from Hollywood and spiraled into depression. It took him over a decade to rebuild his identity. One role, one obsession, one mental collapse. If you're a Star Wars fan, you'll remember the hype that was built up around The Phantom Menace. At just 10 years old, Jake Lloyd was cast to play a young Anakin Skywalker. It should have been a dream come true, but instead, it became a life sentence. Critics tore into the film, and instead of blaming the adults behind it, they blamed Jake Lloyd. Jake was bullied relentlessly at school, he was harassed by classmates who would constantly quote the movie to mock him, and online, he became a meme before memes even existed. It was so bad that Jake would go on to quit acting entirely by the age of 12, but by his 20s, Jake was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He was arrested after a high-speed chase and eventually placed in a psychiatric facility. His mother would later confirm that the trauma started immediately after the film's release, that the pressure and the abuse broke him. Jake didn't just suffer from playing Anakin, he never recovered from it. The 1980s film Who Framed Roger Rabbit is viewed as one of the all-time classics. Bob Hoskins gave the performance of his life, but behind the scenes, the role pushed him past the brink. He spent months acting opposite characters that didn't exist, talking to the empty air and reacting to nothing. After the filming ended, Hoskins began hallucinating cartoon characters. He would see them, he would hear them, they followed him into his home, into his dream. He was quoted as saying, "It really messed with my mind. I had to take an entire year off. I nearly lost it." The movie may be a classic, but for Bob Hoskins, it came at the cost of his grip on reality. From one Joker to another, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker didn't feel like a performance. It felt like something that had crawled out of his mind and simply took over. To prepare, he would drop over 50 pounds, lock himself in isolation, and mentally spiraled into the character's deranged loneliness. He would go on to tell the press, "There were times I felt like I was going mad." And after filming finished, just like Evan Peters, Joaquin disappeared. disappeared. No press tours, no interviews, and he admitted that he didn't want to go near that mental space again, because once he opened that door, it became impossible to shut. Charlize Theron was haunted by a role in Monster. She would go on to transform into a real-life serial killer. She gained over 30 pounds, wore false teeth, and watched hours of disturbing interviews. But the physical changes weren't the problem. It was what the character did to her mind. Theron would go on to suffer insomnia, panic attacks, and emotional numbness, and would later be quoted as saying, "I stayed in that darkness much longer than I should have." Even though the role won her an Oscar, it cost her her peace, and shows you the great lengths that actors are willing to go to give the performance of a lifetime. Eddie Redmayne's performance as Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything was meticulous, but it was also mentally exhausting. Redmayne would go on to study Hawking's physical decline, mimicking the effects of ALS until his own body would ache, but the emotional weight hit even harder. He would later go on to say that he carried Hawking's pain with him even long after the film had wrapped. "I couldn't let it go." Redmayne would continue to suffer tics and twitches from playing the iconic role, and even though he won an Oscar, he admitted it took months and months for him to feel normal again. Shelley Duvall was absolutely broken when she filmed The Shining. Stanley Kubrick's film is considered a horror masterpiece, but for Shelley, the experience was truly horrifying. Kubrick demanded 127 takes of a single scene. He berated her in front of the crew. He intentionally isolated her from others on set, all in the name of performance. Duvall was pushed so hard that she began losing her hair. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she was quoted as saying, "I was really in and out of ill health. Stress is the worst thing in the world." After The Shining was eventually finished, Duvall would slowly disappear from Hollywood. In later years, she was found living in seclusion, struggling with mental illness. What the audience saw as fear on screen turned out to actually be real. You can't do a video about actors losing themselves in a role without mentioning Daniel Day-Lewis. Daniel Day-Lewis is often praised as the greatest living actor, but his dedication to his roles often came at a steep personal cost. For My Left Foot, he stayed in character as a man with cerebral palsy even when he was off camera. He refused to leave his wheelchair, would have crew members feed him, and he even managed to break 2 ribs during production from staying hunched over for long periods of time. Even whilst filming Gangs of New York, he refused to wear a modern coat in the freezing temperatures because he said it wasn't period accurate. This would end up causing him to catch pneumonia and be hospitalized, and Daniel Day-Lewis was quoted as saying, "You don't just play a role, you give yourself to it entirely, and that will come with a cost." In 2017, he abruptly announced his retirement from acting, with some believing it was his way of saving what little was left of himself. Anne Hathaway may have won an Oscar for her haunting portrayal of Fantine in Les Miserables, but few knew how much it actually took for her to deliver that performance. She lost over 25 pounds in just a few weeks, cut off all her hair, and sang live through real sobs and shaking. Hathaway would later confess that the process left her mentally wrecked. She said, "I had to be in places I don't ever want to go to again." After filming had finished, she struggled with depression and described herself as messed up on a cellular level. She couldn't connect with her husband or enjoy daily life. Her success came at the price of her mental clarity, and it took years for her to finally recover. Leonardo DiCaprio finally won that long-awaited Oscar for his part in The Revenant, but the journey to the trophy was brutal. He slept in animal carcasses, ate raw bison liver, crawled through freezing rivers. Every inch of the role was real, and it left DiCaprio physically and emotionally wrecked. He admitted, "I can name 30 or 40 sequences that were some of the most difficult things I've ever had to do." The role demanded so much that even cast and crew called it a survival story. DiCaprio called it the most difficult performance of his career. It was raw, it was real, and it nearly pushed him to breaking point. These actors didn't just play their roles, they became them, and in doing so, some of them lost themselves completely. Some walked away shaken, others never walked away at all. When you watch an unforgettable performance, remember this: sometimes what you're seeing is a real person falling apart in real time, because the deeper they go for the role, the harder it is to come back.